You're listening to the New Frontier Network with Chris Iverson and Victor Vigiani.
Welcome to NFN, the New Frontier Network, where we explore the new frontiers of phenomenology, ufology, and exopolitics. With me, as always today, he is Victor Vigiani.
Yes, this is Victor Vigiani here, and that you're looking at right now is Chris Iverson.
We'd like to welcome you here to our podcast, and our approach that we are going to be taking as we venture forth down this path of talking to various people in these fields of phenomenology, ufology, and exopolitics is we want to explore and push the boundaries. We want to push and explore the new frontiers that exist out there. We are not so interested, although that's where we all come from, the lights in the skies or the craft that have been talked about from being under the seas. We are really more interested in bringing forth a discussion here that has to do with the reactions, the interactions, and the direction that we are being led, because make no mistake about it, we are being brought along a particular path here, and how we deal with what is going to happen. We have discussed in the past, and we will be discussing in the future, items such as disclosure, and what does disclosure mean to our guests and to our panelists. These are all items that we want to bring forth. We want to have a great discussion with everybody on them. We want to be sure that we are trying to uncover information that is going to be new and informative and exciting to our audience out there. With that, joining Victor and I today is our very distinguished group of panelists and international correspondents, starting with Manuel Lameroy from South Africa. We, of course, have Giorgio Pacenza, who is from the United States and Peru. Representing Portugal is Francisco Mirao Correa. And joining us today is a special correspondent from Toronto is Chrissy Newton. We want to have a thrilling, fun show here for everybody today. Everybody is primed and ready as we have a very special guest with us today. Victor, why don't you tell us a little bit about who we have? And you are muted.
You're muted.
Let me get that one right. Yes, I'll just introduce Lou in a moment. I just want to take off on a few of the things you said, Chris, about where we're headed with all of this. We've gotten so much information over the last 3 years, beginning back in December of 2017 when the dam kind of broke open, and after that, the floodgates are just sort of waggling away with all this water pouring over the dam. And I think we've got a pivotal situation here with Lou Elizondo to shed some light on what has happened, what is going on right now, and where we're going with this. So I just want to tell everyone how pleased we are to have Lou with us. Just a bit of information about Lou. He's a career intelligence officer was a career intelligence officer with the U.S. Army, the Department of Defense, and the National Counterintelligence Executive, and the Office of Director of National Intelligence. There's one feather in his cap. And he's conducted and supervised highly sensitive espionage and terrorism investigations around the world, ran clandestine source operations throughout Latin America and the Middle East. He's a program element manager for he was a program element manager for the Pentagon's Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, with multiple award patents, career intelligence officer with the U.S. Army, and just I think I've just sort of, touched a bit of the whole iceberg with Lou. So Lou, welcome to the New Frontier Network. We are so proud and pleased to have you with us today.
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to thank all of you for having me on. It's truly my sincere honor and pleasure to be here with you today. I apologize we couldn't do this in person, but obviously because of the limitations of being geographically separated, and of course the current ongoing COVID pandemic. But please allow me to extend an apology for not being able to be with you personally. Second of all, I certainly appreciate the introduction. Truth be told, a lot of those accomplishments were achieved based upon people that I was working with. You know, a lot of times when you read somebody's resume, it looks really impressive. And really the truth of the matter is that a lot of those achievements were based upon my work with other people. And so those successes were mutual successes. You know, I think all good, high performing teams operate just like that as a team, right? Just like your show you have right now, your podcast, you've got several high caliber people on with you, right? To make this show just that much more comprehensive, that much better and insightful. Well, same thing with me. So again, thank you for the introduction. But if anybody out there is listening who's ever worked with me, you know, I do have to share a lot of those accomplishments with other people.
Well, that's a breath of fresh air with respect to the whole ufological community, the research community throughout the globe. And that's one of the kind of pushbacks that I always express myself, Lou, is that there are too many lone wolves in this I guess, realm of research. And I think the only way that we're going to reach some sort of consensus about what's going on and reach a common ground as to where we're going, which is the important thing, is the only way we're going to do that is by working together. And this kind of effort that we've brought, you know, with all the correspondents from across the globe here, is sort of a reflection of how serious we think this is, and also too to reinforce exactly what you just said. It is a team effort. So everyone's perspective is important. It always sheds light on things from a different angle. And I think that's the really strong point of where we're going with that today. With that, I'm going to throw things to Giorgio. Giorgio, I know you've got lots of questions. Do you want to start us off with Lou and maybe begin the discussion, and let's just go with wherever it goes from there.
Thank you, Victor. Yes, it was an honor to meet Lou in Peru, and from our time together there working for the History Channel and Air Force, I mean, on a non-paid, at least I was doing it voluntarily, I could assess really that he's a trustworthy person. He's an honorable person and a person with a very good heart. And I thank him very much for the healthy effort he's conducting in favor of disclosure. So one of the things that we were talking about was about promoting a productive social conversation worldwide regarding the issue of UFOs, UAPs, and what they may mean. This is a very important issue. For many years, all of this theme has been surrounded by mystery and even cynicism in the UFO community. But what I would like to know is, ask Lou, if he agrees that the projects that Mr. Mellon, Christopher Mellon, did not have access to should be supervised by the regular, I don't know how to call it, information ecology within the government. Because if we were actually talking about recovered alien bodies, MILABs perhaps, military abductions covertly conducted on some citizens, and successful retroengineering and this kind of advanced aspects of these issues, do you think, Lou, that the civilian community and the regular government officials would be able to handle such an information?
Well, Giorgio, first of all, thank you very much for the kind introduction as well. I also want to say thank you for your tremendous support. For those who don't know, my friend Giorgio here was absolutely instrumental in allowing us and facilitating our ability to talk to very senior ranking people in Latin America when we were down there for History Channel's Inside America's UFO Investigation. So Giorgio, I want to begin by saying thank you very much. You did a tremendous job. We would not have had any degree of success had it not been for you. And I will tell you, each and every time I go back down to see my friends in South America, you're going to be the first person I call. So thank you very much. It was tremendous effort by you and your friends and your colleagues. And it was just frankly an honor and a privilege to work with you. So thank you very much. Secondly, let me go ahead and address your question. As you refer to Mr. Mellon at the time was the Assistant Secretary of Defense. That's one of the positions that are directly under the Secretary within the Department of Defense. Yes, to put this simply, oversight is always important. In any type of free society, when you have elected officials and you have entrusted individuals, you appoint individuals that you entrust to manage and oversee and supervise certain activities, in this particular case, intelligence activities, it is absolutely paramount. In fact, it is illegal if you do not give those individuals oversight of the programs that they are charged to oversee. And so I think for anybody, let's take Mr. Mellon out of the equation entirely and just say anybody, let's say you, Giorgio, you get appointed to be an Assistant Secretary of Defense. It is incumbent upon me, if I work for you, to provide you that information so you can make the decisions you need to make as a leader, period, full stop. And also be able to inform the chain of command. Now, we're talking about a military organization, but it's really not a whole lot different than any other type of governmental organization. Oversight is key. Otherwise, without oversight, we have seen throughout the world when government programs run amok, when they go unsupervised, there is no checks and balance, right? And a lot of times we see an abuse of power when that occurs. Sometimes it's deliberate, sometimes it is not. But either way, if you don't have that proper oversight, you set yourself up for not only mistakes, but potentially at some point abuses. And so I know I kind of answered your question a little bit obliquely, but I think it's important for me to emphasize just how important that oversight is. It's actually one of the fundamental reasons why I left in 2017 the Department of Defense to begin with. My boss's boss's boss, General Mattis, then the Secretary of Defense, is somebody I served in combat with. So I had a great sense of loyalty and duty to this individual. And the system did not allow information to get to where it needed to go. So yeah, I do think it's very important. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yes, well, sure. Now I understand clearly where you're coming from. The thing is whether civilians are capable. We don't know if society in general is capable of dealing with the most profound issues regarding this UAP situation. And if there are successful, let's say, retroengineering programs, can that be handled?
Well, let me put it this way, Giorgio. We are in the midst of a global pandemic right now we call COVID. We trust the American people to know that there is a virus out there that is highly contagious, for which there is no cure for until recently. We trust the American people with knowledge that there are foreign adversaries that have nuclear capable weapons that can obliterate every city off the face of the map here in the United States. We trust the American people with all sorts of information that constantly challenge our current paradigm. So can we trust the American people? Can we trust citizens of the world with knowledge that we may not be alone? Well, we already kind of have, haven't we? Let's take, for example, SETI, the program here for what, by its name, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. For a while, it was receiving government funding. So we were spending American taxpayer dollars to deliberately look for potentially life outside of our solar system. Then we have NASA that is spending millions, if not billions, of American taxpayer dollars each year, specifically for the purposes of finding life somewhere outside of our planet, whether it be Mars or the moons of some of our exoplanets. I think that is a fundamental question that makes us human. Are we alone? And so whether or not we trust people to ask these questions are already being asked. So can we trust people with the knowledge that there may be something going on here? Well, I think it's too late to ask that question. I don't think there's a choice in the matter. I think we're here, and I think we're at this point now. So we are forced to ask the question, okay, what are these things? And at the end of the day, if there is some sort of logical terrestrial explanation for these things, great. but it's been an enigma for over 70 years and arguably maybe thousands of years. So I'm okay with that. I'm satisfied with a very earthly terrestrial explanation. But I think we are doing ourselves a disservice if that is the only place we're looking for answers, because we are seeing these things operate and maneuver in a way that is so fundamentally unusual than anything that we have to compare and contrast it to, that we have to ask the question, are these things not from here? Now, let's be careful when I say not from here, because a lot of people automatically say to themselves, well, if it's not from here, it must be from out there. Well, not necessarily true. We now realize in the world of quantum physics. So let me backtrack a little bit here, because I want to answer this question thoroughly. You know, we had this old way of looking at the world until the Renaissance, and all of a sudden Sir Isaac Newton comes around and proposes this Newtonian physics that really explains our observations at the macro level of the universe. And it took a couple hundred years before Einstein comes in, and he totally upset everything and all the models by injecting this theory of relativity, which seemed to be completely opposite to the principles of Newtonian physics. And yet here we are, they're very real. They're actually part of our universe just as much as they're just as relative and factual as the Newtonian physics. And now, all of a sudden, here we are in the 20th century, and now comes the introduction of the latter half of the 20th century, quantum mechanics. Yet a completely different way of looking at the universe. In fact, so odd and so bizarre that one scientist once said, it's like having a box and a dog walks in the box and out walks two cats. It doesn't make sense. And yet it absolutely describes what we are seeing at the micro and nano level of our universe, right? So quantum physics is real, and it's something completely and totally different. So I guess my point to this, my long-winded explanation and why I went behind this and I went to this analogy, was because when you have this question of where it's from, people have this binary solution. It's either here or it's from out there. But the universe is far more complex than that. The universe rarely works in a binary type model. In fact, the universe likes to take diagonals and work in fractals and you know, these wonderful, beautiful arcs that we call the Fibonacci sequence. So my point being is that there may be other alternatives out there. It might be something from, and again, I'm not saying this is the answer because I don't know, but what if these things are actually right from here and always have been from here? But you know, it's something that could be you know, transdimensional. And when I say transdimensional, I don't mean this in some sort of airy-fairy philosophical sense. There are other dimensions. We know that as a fact. That quantum physics has proven that. You can look at things like string theory and M theory. There's all sorts of these loopholes in our current understanding of the construct of the universe. So I think we need to be objective when we ask ourselves where these things are from. Could they be ours? Yes. Could they be someone else's? Yes. Could they be something else? Yes. Could it be from somewhere else? Yes. Could it be from right here? Yes. There's a whole litany of options that I think we need to be prepared to ask ourselves and not pigeonhole ourselves necessarily into it's an either or solution, because I'm not sure we have enough data to even draw that conclusion yet.
It would seem to be that way. I mean, what you're indicating here, Lou, is that we definitely have a case of we have questions in front of us. And there's something that everybody looks at depending on your perspective. You might actually see something else. In fact, you could be the person observing the two cats walk out of the box the dog went into, and you don't even see two cats. You see the space between the cats that didn't exist there previously as well. So it's a very complex question. And with any complex question, you don't necessarily have one answer. It's very much a D, all of the above. These are not necessarily mutually exclusive answers. Is there a multiverse? There appears to be. Are there extra dimensions? There certainly appears to be. Is there some warping of time and time being non-linear? That certainly seems to be. And we
Well,
are just
actually, you're
learning
absolutely
these
right.
things.
We've already proven that concept, right? I mean, we know two fundamental ways to warp space-time. That's with a lot of mass or a lot of energy. And when I say that a lot of mass, this is not theoretical. You can have for example, GPS. A lot of people don't know this, but we spend a lot of money each month recalibrating the clocks on our GPS satellites that are orbiting around Earth. Now, why is that? Well, the way GPS works is it's a timing issue, is what it is, like a stopwatch. And what you do is you set up all these little satellites around the planet, and depending how long it takes the signal from the surface of the planet to get to these satellites, et cetera, and vice versa, you can triangulate where you are on the planet. And why is that important? Because what most people don't know is that the atomic cesium clock that is on board a GPS satellite is the exact same atomic cesium clock that is at the ground station here on Earth. And so these clocks are calibrated to run precisely at the exact same time, always super, super, super accurate. And yet, the moment we started launching these things up in space, we started realizing you had this weird atomic clock drift. And the question is, why are all these clocks, these atomic clocks up on these satellites, why is their time so different than here on Earth? That doesn't make sense. And we find out that, oh, this planet itself, the mass of this planet, the very planet we stand upon, is warping space-time sufficiently enough where the clock that is here at the ground station begins to run at a different pace than the clocks that are orbiting our own planet. So these are not theoretical concepts. This is theoretical fact. This is the universe we actually live in, where time is fundamentally, it is flexible, it is stretchable. And I know that's hard for people to understand because we look in terms of time as being linear, but we realize now that time is like a rubber band. It's actually quite flexible, and it's not just time, it's space as well, because space and time are intertwined. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and this is, we have with us today Francisco, who just happens to be a university level professor. And this is a discussion that we want to perhaps, further expand upon, that when you look at all of this information and you look at where it's coming from and the number of people, and you touched upon this a little bit in your first answer to Giorgio regarding the number of programs that must exist out there. Francisco, it's something that he's been aware of and has studied and has researched and has looked at. And wonder if you had some questions for Lou here regarding the programs and the varied approach that has been taken over the years, going all the way back to Project Blue Book and where we are today, and that we must have different departments, different organizations, different branches of the government that are all dealing with this and looking at this in many different ways.
Exactly. Well, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here and to allow us the opportunity to talk to you. So my question is regarding Blue Book, because when it ended in '69, General Bolander said, well, there's nothing more to spend money on studying UFOs. Everything is explained, but every sighting that had implications to national security is not part of Blue Book. So indirectly, he was acknowledging that maybe there was another covert program studying UFOs. When you joined AATIP, were you aware of past programs? And eventually, and also, why the show off of 2017? I mean, it's almost like passing a rubber over the past 70 years, because the sightings, the expression from the pilots back in the 40s and the 50s, how they were amazed by the maneuvers from those objects were so incredible. They are more or less the same that we see with the Nimitz case, etc. And so there were 70 years of studying probably. So why repeating in 2017 something that was probably seen back in the 40s, 70s?
Sure. Very fair question. So let me see if I can recapture your question. So you want to know why during my time in AATIP, did we look at historical records and information to help make us make better informed assessments? And two, if not, why didn't we look at these past experiences, 70 years worth of observations to help us make a more informed analysis, if you will, detailed analysis of the data? Is that correct? Is that what you're asking me?
Exactly.
Okay, so very fair question. So first of all, in order to answer that question, I think it's important to understand a little bit about me and Luis Elizondo and who I am. So my background has always been as a special agent and investigator, is just the facts, ma'am kind of guy. No nonsense. I spent my entire life chasing bad guys, terrorists, and spies. That's my job. I think it's critically important when, as an investigator, okay, if you are, let's look at this from a court of law perspective. To preserve evidence, you have to make sure you handle evidence very carefully. So for me, my job has always been, as an investigator, is to present the facts to the jury. In this case, you are the jury. When I was in AATIP, it was my leadership that was the jury. It was very important that I never cross-pollinated information that I could not substantiate as being valid into that calculus. Because even though it may be 100% correct, because I personally, my team could not validate that information, and it was historical, it could not be put into the equation of the calculus we were dealing with, because we could not substantiate. There was no way for us to say, yes, we personally wrote this report. We have the evidence, we have the photographs, we have the videos. So it's like when you are going to a jury, you sequester yourself from any information that is not fundamentally related to the task at hand. My job in the Department of Defense was national security. It wasn't humanitarian assistance. It wasn't physics and the scientific community. It was intelligence and threats. That wasn't my call. That is the job of the Department of Defense. So because of that, the greater umbrella is always under a threat, if you will, picture. Is something a threat? And if you don't know, then you have to presume it can be until you prove it's not. So when we were collecting our information, we were very focused on the military sources, the military technology that we could leverage to help us understand what it is, the technology we're dealing with. What are these things that are flying around our nuclear strike group carrier groups? And what are these things that are flying around our aircraft and our nuclear facilities? Is the old information interesting? Yes, but sadly it's anecdotal because it's old data, right? It's just like an old cold case. The older a case gets, the less and less reliable that information becomes. So we made a deliberate decision not to muddy the waters and go to my for example, the undersecretary and say, hey boss, we got these things flying in the sky. I want you to read these reports from 1942. That's not helpful. What I need to say is, hey boss, we got these things flying around our sky. And by the way, here's a video taken last week from the cockpit of an F-18 Super Hornet, doing maneuvers over, AOR X, Y, or Z. That's much more compelling than a bunch of anecdotal information that, quite frankly, in some cases, 70 years old. Now, do I think it's not relevant? No, I didn't say that. It is absolutely relevant to this discussion because now I'm a civilian and I'm not under the same yoke, if you will, or rules that I was when I was in the Department of Defense. So now we can open up the aperture, if you will, of what we're doing and include a lot more information. I can also talk to a lot more people. I can talk to foreign nationals. I can talk to civilians. I can talk to civilian pilots. When I was in AATIP, we couldn't. It was strictly DoD and intelligence only. So it's not that we didn't want to necessarily, we didn't find it interesting, the historical information, but we didn't have the fidelity of data that we do now. We have multiple sensor systems. A single aircraft flying, most people don't know, is an intelligence data collection platform. First and foremost, yes, it's a weapon platform, but it's also collecting intelligence and data. And it's got many, many, many sensors, an entire suite of sensors from anything from radar, hyperspectral technology, and infrared to help us better discern what we're looking at. So reading a report from a pilot that's describing a Foo Fighter incident in 1943, although interesting, I'm not sure is as helpful as providing a 17-page report on an incident that occurred, let's say, last year, with color photographs and radar data and video and telemetry and all those other things. So again, I know I'm probably kind of going into a long-winded explanation into this, but I think it's important because a lot of people ask me, well, why don't you look at this data? It's been here for years. Well, we know it's been there for years, but it's not overly helpful in the job that I was in because I could not tell the boss face to face, yes, I have validated and verified this information myself. There's no way to do that. So that's unfortunately the reason why you didn't see a lot more of that historical information being injected into our efforts during AATIP.
I think it's important to recognize what you're saying, Lou, because that information, as it came down the pipe back when Francesco was alluding to it, that information had a gradual change on everybody who digested that information. It changed how we looked at the phenomenon. It changed the phenomenon itself. It changed the facts. They evolved, but it also changed us as a species. And I know, Chrissy, you've got some questions about how this kind of information has changed us or changed individuals with respect to how it unfolds and comes down the pipe over the years.
Yeah, like Lou, in my day job, outside of looking into ufology and hanging with great people like this, I work in public relations. So I'm curious, throughout AATIP, throughout any time working with the U.S. government yourself, or just knowledge of, we hear a lot about people working within the CIA, tampering with media, working in media jobs in higher positions, and then tampering with what comes out. My question really is, do you know of anybody or yourself that when you were disseminating information during that time, if you decided to mislead the media to make them think something else? And if it wasn't you, has there been anyone that you've ever worked with in the US government that's decided to do that? And if so, why? What was the main purpose of it?
Oh, so that's a great question. Let me first answer this question succinctly. The bottom line is yes. I am absolutely aware of times where U.S. government spokespeople have deliberately misled the media and ultimately the people of the United States. Let's look at Mogadishu, for example, in Somalia, when the United States was planning the beach landing during Somalia during the early days. Information was leaked to CNN and several other major media outlets saying, we're going to come and we're going to attack on this beachhead, right? So they brought up a bunch of cameras and we sent a couple hovercrafts trying to make it look like we're going to invade. But that was actually a deception operation. We actually invaded several miles away, knowing that the enemy was watching the TV, knowing that the enemy was watching CNN and was anticipating our landing to be in a different location. And so yes, these incidents occur all the time. One could even, I don't want to get too political here, but even the invasion of Iraq, predicated on weapons of mass destruction that turned out to be, not so, right? Single source reporting. You are in the world of public affairs and public relations. You know that sometimes data, when it comes in, has to go through a certain filter before it is disseminated and consumed by the masses. And why is that? Well, because in some cases it's damage control. In other ways it's fine tuning a narrative, right, and trying to avoid potential tripwires and pitfalls. Now, am I aware of us doing this internally in the United States intelligence community? My organization never did that because for us, we were under very strict rules of something called intelligence oversight. And there's something called a Procedure 15 violation in the Army and also in the Greater Department of Defense. There are rules and regulations because in the past, the Department of Defense and the services haven't always played well with others. There's been times during the 60s where we were using American soldier spies to go and collect information on student groups, right? Which now would be atrocious. You could never infiltrate it. You can't do that. But back then, some of these assets were misused. So Congress put several laws into place that really prohibit that to a large degree. And usually when somebody is found out to be doing that, it doesn't last very long. From my perspective, I took an oath long ago to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And those enemies, if they lie within the construct of the U.S. governmental architecture, well, that's included. Anybody who's deliberately trying to mislead the American people on this topic, While I was in the program, I didn't see it. I will tell you, the moment I left till even today, there are some things occurring right now that disappoint me. For example, you have this flip-flopping of public affairs. First of all, saying that AATIP was real and Lou was part of it. Then they said, well, AATIP was never about UFOs. And then, of course, the evidence comes out, oh, it was about UFOs. Well, Lou never had anything to do with it. And of course, Senator Reid has to come out and say, well, actually, he does because he worked for me. You know, and you have this. I don't want to say it's misinformation, because it might not be. It may just be, frankly, dysfunction. And I don't want to confuse the two. And I hope, well, you know what? That's a great question. I don't know if I'd rather it be dysfunction or disinformation, because it's, on one hand, if it's dysfunction, then we've got bigger problems on our hands. But if it's disinformation, well, we've got a whole nother set of problems on our hands. So,
I agree.
you know, that's a great question. And I don't want to hypothesize too much on intent, because I think intent is very important. And I don't know what their intent is. The only thing I can think of is that they want more breathing space to try to figure this out, so they have answers, because there's a lot of pressure by the American people on the American government to say, what is this, right? You have this multi-billion-dollar apparatus where its whole job is to identify and assess an enemy. And yet here's the thing in our sky, we only just now got the Department of Defense to admit, yes, the videos are real, and yes, they're real UFOs. I mean, it took 3 years, but hey, it's a start. And I think as more information, comes to light, Chrissy, you're going to see hopefully a more willingness, more openness by the American government to have the conversation. You just had the nation of Japan openly discuss entering into an agreement, a bilateral agreement with the United States government for the sole purpose to discuss UFOs and UAPs. That is historic. Don't make no mistake. The conversation is now evolving from a U.S. conversation to truly an international one. Now, I know some people are going to say, well, it's always been an international conversation. Yeah, true, but not acknowledged by the U.S. government. That's different. It is now. And you have the government, U.S. government, actively now engaging other foreign countries on this topic. So, you know, as an intelligence officer, I'm trained to look at indicators. And that is a definite indicator. That is a huge, big red, if you will, flare in the sky saying, hey, you know, we are making a signal here that we're willing to take this topic seriously. You have the creation and the establishment of a UAP task force, which is really just an AATIP 2.0, but that's fine. I mean, I think it's great. And individuals that are part of that organization, I personally know and I respect and have been part of the AATIP program previously. So I think we're definitely in good hands. I think we're on a tremendous start. And if the price of that disclosure is people trying to snipe at me once in a while or try to discredit me, you know what? I'm fine with it. I'm okay with it, because at the end of the day, look how far we've come, and we've done that collectively. By the way, it's not. I can't take credit for that, because really the credit goes to folks like you that are willing to have a conversation. People in the media, right? People now saying, hey, this is important. We need to talk about it. I'm willing to put my credibility on the line, and I'm willing to risk the raised eyebrows and the sneers and the jeers to have this conversation. And it's working. You now have Congress being briefed on it. You have presidents being briefed on it. This is tremendous. This is I hate to say, you know, in the terms what we talked about with Newton, but I believe this may just be a new renaissance for this topic. At least I hope so.
I hope so too.
It would be great if it is. I think one of the things that could potentially be here that we're talking about, and why there might be a way to, or they've utilized if you want to call it disinformation, or a little bit of Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain is actually going on, pay no attention to that man, but look over here, is something to do with, might be the threat assessment. And as you said, we really didn't know, still really don't know. I'm sure that there's much more known than has been released, of course, what it is that's flying above and below us and has been interacting with us. As far as a threat assessment goes, that's something with our panelist Manuel that we've been talking about in depth regarding the threat assessment and whether or not it really is a threat. And I know, Manuel, you had some comments and questions for Lou in that regard.
Yeah, I'd like to hear that, because you know I think it's important from a intellectual perspective to recognize a threat assessment in government terms really boils down to two things, and that's capabilities versus intent. That's it. And we've seen some of the capabilities, but we still have no idea the intent. So therefore, we have no way to truly assess the level of threat that this thing imposes upon us, if at all. It may very well be that it's not, but again, let's not forget that this was Department of Defense, right? It's in its term, defense, national security issue. That is the job of that department. And so anything under the lens of DoD is always clearly going to be looked at initially under the lens of a potential threat.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Lou. I also want to thank you for your dedication to educating the people about this topic. And it's important that the narrative that we craft is as accurate as possible. So I perfectly understand you come from a background where your job was to assess threats and threat potentials. And when it comes to that, I also perfectly agree that looking at it objectively, there is a potential of a threat. You mentioned intent and capability. Typically, all the people I spoke with, and nowadays, they also take context into consideration, which, as the word suggests, puts things in a different context sometimes. If you look at a lot of the actions, they may not really be hostile, but okay, even if you don't just focus on that, if you look at the bigger picture of the contact phenomenon, if you look at all the experiences that people have had, both with abductions or with positive contacts, then what we see is that there are different groups present with different agendas, and the majority of them seem to be benevolent. So I think it's important when we craft the narrative to not just focus on the threat. It's a part of it, but it, from my experience, is a minor part of it. But it's still important, but it doesn't paint the whole picture. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think, first of all, you could be right. I think it's a 50-50, but I hate to go down the path of experiencers, but since you brought it up, let's go ahead and do this for a second. So for those who are familiar with the term experiencers, these are individuals who claim to have some sort of interaction with a UAP and potentially its occupants, if there are occupants. I look at this in very realistic terms. If you were to go and take an Uber from your house right now to the supermarket, and for some reason the Uber driver decides to go to his house first while you're in the car, and then maybe do some shopping at the mall, and then finally take you to the store, even though you haven't been harmed, technically that's called kidnapping. You are being put somewhere, moving somewhere against your own free will, period. So if, for example, my daughters were taken somewhere, and even if they weren't hurt, but they were taken somewhere that they did not want to go against their will, I think that's a problem. I think that's a real issue. Furthermore, if some of what these people are reporting have actual things, devices, their bodies are being touched, from my perspective, again, coming as an agent, former agent, that's assault, possibly much worse. So if someone does anything to you against your own free will, to me, that is a threat, regardless what the end result is. Or if somebody, for example, if you have somebody who's put secretly a camera in your room and can watch you anytime they want, whether you're undressing or eating dinner or anything else, even though it's not a physical threat, it's a threat to your privacy. It's a problem. So if something has the ability to take you against your own free will at any time and at its own discretion without your approval, explicit approval, then I don't think that's benevolent. I would challenge you in that, that could be a very serious issue. And what if they decide, if there is a they, rather than just take you aboard somewhere and put you back where you are? Maybe they don't. Maybe you're just gone forever. I mean, these are some of the things that I look at through my lens. And again, I don't have empirical evidence for either side. So whether they are a threat or not, I don't know. I'll give you a quick analogy because you mentioned threat, and I've used this analogy before, but I really, really mean it. So if I may ask you, Manuel, where do you live right now?
At this moment, I live in South Africa, but I'm originally from Belgium.
Okay, so you live in South Africa, and at night in South Africa, beautiful country. Do you lock your front door at night before you go to bed, just to be safe?
I do, but I leave my gate open. Anybody can come onto the property.
Okay, but you lock your front door, right? And I suspect, like most people do, you might even check your windows once in a while, lock the windows, and if you live in a big city, you might even turn on the alarm system just to be extra safe. Not that you expect anything bad to happen, but just out of precaution. Well, let's say one night after locking everything up, you go to bed and you wake up in the morning, you come downstairs and have a hot cup of coffee or tea, and all of a sudden you notice muddy boot prints in your living room on the carpet. Now, your doors are locked, the windows are locked, and the alarm system's on. And yet in the morning, you have muddy boot prints in your living room that weren't there before. Now, no one's been hurt, nothing's out of place, nothing's been taken. But again, you have muddy boot prints now in your living room that weren't there the night before. Is that a threat? And my response to that is, well, it could be if it wanted to be. So we don't know yet. We don't have enough data to arbitrarily say yes or no. And so that would be my personal response to that question.
I perfectly agree with everything you said. The thing is that if you look at the contact phenomenon, there's a whole other side to it too. I don't know how familiar you are with Giorgio's research, for instance, or with the work of Paula Harris. If you look at contact experiences in Latin America, so I'm not talking about abductions experiences that people experience as benevolent for some reason. I'm talking about voluntary, being invited, open contact experiences as there have been. That is an important part of the whole equation too. And it's often missing in the narrative. That's what I was pointing at.
Yes, certainly. I think, emissary and we all have ambassadors, right? Countries, and that's the job of the ambassadors, to represent the will and the intent of the people that they represent. So, if there is an effort and an outward effort to engage, if there is some other species that is outwardly trying to engage our species through these quasi-diplomatic efforts, then that's something I would totally support, because ultimately it helps us gain our understanding of what we're dealing with, and maybe vice versa, right? So we have, as nations, we have interests, and we have representatives and ambassadors to some very unlikely organizations and countries, even countries that are adversarial. We have representatives there to facilitate cooperation and communication. So I would totally support something like that. If there is an outward effort to engage mankind, I think that's fantastic. But I don't think we should necessarily say, well, because they're doing that, if they're doing that, that there's no threat, because we have other countries that we have ambassadors with and good relationships with, but they still have nuclear weapons. So, there's that capability that's still there. The intent might not be there, but the capability sure is. And as we've seen through history, intent can change on a dime. There's countries that we have been friends with and then enemies with and then friends with. So, I hate to put all my eggs in one basket and simply say, hey, let's all sing Kumbaya. I tend to be just a little bit more cautious from that point.
While we're on the topic of contact, I think we should not move away from that. Chrissy, you have a question regarding that. Then after Lou responds to your question, we're going to throw it to Giorgio for another question. So go ahead, Chrissy.
Yeah, for sure, Lou. So when we look at things like the aerial school incident that happened from Betty and Barney, there's so many abduction cases that are connected to UAPs. Will the government even remotely acknowledge that or talk about it? Because one day that conversation needs to be had. It's having within our community, but it needs to be talked about in a larger scale, especially now when we have all these things unfolding, month after month after month. That conversation has to be had. And what do you think they're going to say?
So I first, let me, if I can, go back a little bit. You've said something very interesting: abduction cases. Now, from a legal perspective, and yes, that's kind of where I come from, abduction is something very specific, right? Is someone truly first of all, we have to find out, is someone really being abducted? Abduction is it's a crime. You're taking someone against their own free will somewhere that they haven't agreed to go to. Okay, so that's abduction, and then keeping them there for a while. The question is an abduction actually occurring? And then two, if there is some sort of interaction, is this a physical abduction, or is there some sort of other psychological event occurring that gives the impression to one that they are truly being abducted? Now, I know it sounds crazy, but we have weapons right now and psychological operations and whatnot. We even have these experiments going on. We call it the God helmet. Using certain frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, we can induce certain emotional feelings and even hallucinations in the human being. We've done it. We're doing it now, and a lot of universities are looking at these experiments, because at the end of the day, the human brain is nothing but a bunch of electric connections. That's all it is. It's neurons, electrical connections. So just like any other electrical system, you can short it out. You can do all sorts of strange things with it. So the question is the phenomena of abduction actually occurring? And I'm not going to go either way on that, but what I can say is, if it is really occurring, then it is something that we need to talk about, but we need substantial evidence and proof. And it has to be more than just somebody in the backyard with no eyewitnesses. It has to be and I don't want to say a credible individual, because people out there are going to say, well, I'm credible. I understand that. When I say a credible event, I mean, you have to have lots of witnesses. Look, you and I can watch a car crash. You can be on one side of the street, I can be on the other side of the street, and we will describe the same exact event completely differently, and we will see things differently. So it's really important. The more witnesses you have witnessing an event, the more credible it becomes, because you have people looking at the same event at the same time, at the same place, under the same circumstances. So it's important. A single report of somebody. How many people report all the time, hey, my girlfriend or my boyfriend, I think, just got kidnapped? Well, there's a reason why we give a 24-hour grace period before we file a missing person, because good chances that they really weren't. They probably just went and went to the neighbor's house and fell asleep, or maybe had one too many beers. So it's important that when we're dealing with this particular topic, that we only look at from a governmental perspective. You want us to look at the empirical data. You don't want us getting to anything that's subjective. That's why in a court of law, you say, oh, well, that's hearsay. Well, that's someone else's observation. That's really not so relevant unless you had directly eyes down on an event. Now, do I think it's worth having the conversation? Absolutely. Do I think that if there is empirical data substantiating that the government needs to get involved? You're damn right it does. The problem is that data hasn't been quantified and qualified yet in a way that paints a compelling picture that that's going on. At least from my experience with the data that I had access to, we're not there yet. And we want to be very careful prejudicing the jury, saying that, in all these abduction cases, well, okay, first of all, what does abduction mean? Let's be specific. And then two, because everybody will describe, there's a lot of commonalities, and then there's a lot of differences between each and every one of these cases. And it could just be frankly, our human, if you will, our human analytic overlay of what we're experiencing. Again, we can look at the exact same thing and you and I describe it completely different. I'll give you another example. I'm colorblind. And so when you say, oh, look at that beautiful sunset, isn't that gorgeous, that beautiful red? Well, I may describe it as a beautiful red sunset, but I don't see it that way. I see it something different. And the question is, which is the truth? Well, they're both true. And I think we have to be cautious when we go down that avenue. I've always kept my opinions to myself regarding abductions, only because I don't have enough data to speak from an authoritative perspective. People say, well, there's countless amount of evidence out there, an issue, will they bring it forward? And it can't just be, well, he said, she said. You know what I mean? And by the way, I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, what would the government do about that then? Like, how would they disseminate that information? Because obviously you would scare so many people if even one being true, one abduction being true.
You're right. And we have to take baby steps to address this. You're absolutely right. What would the government do? I don't know. That's a great question. I think we need to ask the government that question without saying, hey, these people are being abducted. What are you going to do about it? I would say, hey, if it turns out that there are individuals that are being taken, whether willingly or unwillingly, what is the role of our government to either stop it or understand it? Right. I think it's a super fair question. I don't think there's anything wrong with asking that question. I think how you ask it's important, because what happens the moment you go to elect a leader and say, I want to know why so many people are being kidnapped, and taken aboard the mothership, I don't think you're going to get very far. I really don't, because of the 70 years plus of stigma and Elvis on the mothership and tinfoil hats. That is not helpful to the conversation. And anybody who comes forward and says, well, I know what's going on, you're exactly the reason why we haven't had this conversation yet, because we don't know what's going on yet. And no one is truly an expert. This is my whole issue with the term ufology and ufologists. And no disrespect to anybody who considers himself that, but you go to a university, an academic institution, and you get a degree in geology, you're a geologist, or a degree in immunology, you're an immunologist, or a degree in psychology, you're a psychologist. And yet, no one goes to school to be a ufologist. There is no expert. Everybody claims to be an expert, and there's this landscape is so riddled with hucksters and fraudsters and people making cottage industries for themselves that you really don't know who to believe. And it makes it really difficult to have a conversation with an elected official, especially a senator or a congressperson or a president, about this topic, because it is charged with a lot of stigma, and people are so emotional about it. There's a lot of people who are absolutely certain they have the answer. But I will tell you, the one lesson I learned in intelligence, you can be absolutely sure of something and still be absolutely wrong.
Great
It's
observation.
a classic case, I think, that
Yeah.
we see here of, the more you know, the more you find out, the more you realize that there is a broader world out there, and that you know less than you even ever thought you did.
Precisely. Every time you open a door, there's going to be
Space.
10 behind it that you may never be able to
Right.
open.
Am I in the room? No. In fact, in terms of even with abductions, for instance, as you're talking about them, there have been studies done, very, very good scientific studies have been done regarding people who have reported their experience with this phenomenology. And approximately 75% of them have indicated that they would like those experiences to continue. So then you look at it in terms of, well, do we have a little bit of Stockholm Syndrome going on here, where you're identifying with the people who are taking you and are your captors? Or is it indeed a very pleasant experience, and no, they're not coming in and asking permission and filing triplicate form with the mayor of your town to say, can we take this individual and talk to them for a couple of hours? They are coming in and taking you ostensibly against your will. But if you wish to go back again, then is really what happened an abduction that occurred? Or is it more of, we didn't exactly ask your permission first, but we brought you on board and we're examining you and taking you through it? Even though there are people that have indicated, and as you said, your brain is, we are electric beings. Our body is controlled by electricity, the neurons. And perhaps it's a case of those people coming in and they're brainwashed and they're told, hey, you enjoyed the experience. It was good for you. Come on back. Is it that? We don't know. But all of these are questions that we still really don't know. And it does call for more studies to be done. I know, Giorgio, there's one of the things that we had been talking about is secrecy, and the role of secrecy regarding this information and who has what information and what is going on. I know you had some comments and or questions for Lou in that regard.
Yes, I have been following also the alleged contact experiences since 1975. After a personal family connection with those events in Peru. I would like to suggest that the situation is much more complex and nuanced than abductions as we normally understand it. A person like Kathleen Marden, I would highly recommend Kathleen Marden regarding her abduction research. What happened when they did this research, they found that most people didn't consider their experiences abductions. But abductions get most of the attention. The classical abduction scenario gets most of the social, cultural attention, but that's not what is happening. Also in, let's say, the free research, the Foundation for Experiencers Research founded by Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut, we came up with a survey for 4,000 people from 105 countries responded. An anonymous survey, which gives more credence to the wide variety, first, of experiences. First, that it is real. It is real, really happening with a lot of people. At least you cannot say that they're all lying or that they're all hallucinating. But, and that's something that has to be looked at. Also, Manuel Lamiroy has a wonderful research for many decades regarding experiences of many people around the world. If we are truly going to assess beyond the patterns that were used in the Pentagon, in your work with AATIP, if we're going to truly assess what may be going on, we need to try to listen to the experiencers. And I can tell you, it's a very complex issue. Most of the experiences do not seem to be abusive in our human understanding of that term. But I would like to ask you something more specifically. Would TTSA be interested in scientifically recording an interactive sighting in the US or perhaps Latin America or Europe, if the opportunity arose by means of credible contactees, so that you could record objectively in an objective way an interaction that doesn't have to become an abduction. You know what I mean? If we are truly going to assess if this is an actual threat or not, or at least most of it an actual threat or not, we need to start to listen to the experiencers, the genuine experiencers, and also to try to interact with the phenomenon objectively. Would TTSA be willing to do this?
So Giorgio, wonderful question. I can't speak on behalf of TTSA, but I can tell you personally, absolutely. One of the things that we could certainly look at going down the road here is having a scientific, with proper cameras and everything else, an attempt to interact with these things. I think that's the holy grail of all this, right? If we have an ability to communicate, truly communicate in a way, and that communication doesn't have to be even a conversation, right? There's all sorts of ways to communicate. I can go like this and people know what that means. Any basic form of communication, I think, would be incredibly helpful to this cause. But I don't think it's going to be necessarily the DoD, the Department of Defense, or frankly TTSA that will lead that charge. I think a fair, objective, scientific, academic approach to this would be more than welcomed. I don't think you're going to get any pushback. It's something that certainly, I think coming from my background, scientific background in school and whatnot, I welcome the scientific method. And I think that's something I would be absolutely part of. In fact, there's an effort I'm doing right now, very quietly, working with some individuals that proposes to do something very similar to that. See if we can quantify and qualify data based upon some interesting experiences that are occurring in a particular area. I think that would be fantastic. Absolutely open to it. And the problem is actually doing it.
I'd like to circle back for a second, Lou, if we could, with respect to where you're going with your organization and what you did in AATIP and all of the directions that things were moving. Let's just drop a scenario here for a second regarding this thing called disclosure, and with the caveat that I really don't know what that means. Okay, let's just pretend that disclosure is a package that sits on a desk of somebody or a group of people very, very important, saying, okay, what are we going to put in this package if we wish to have a discussion or begin a narrative with the general public about this thing called the UFO ET question and whatever that is? What's going to go into that package that you may be familiar with, and what might they keep out of that package?
Okay, so wow, no one's ever asked me that before. So let me make sure I give you I'm going to give you a world according to Lou answer, and then I'm going to give you a probably a little bit more formalized response as if I was a government official. I'm going to do that in reverse, actually. I'm going to give you the formal response. In that box that I'm going to be giving to my senior leader is going to be the who, what, when, where, how, why of things. Basically just the facts, right? This is what it is. This is how it works. This is where it's from. This is who's behind the wheel. This is their intent. All the things you would need to make a tactical and strategic decision about this topic, right? You have to arm, so to speak, the leadership with the necessary information to allow them to make well-informed decisions. So those are all the interrogatives that we think about and that you would expect from an organization like Department of Defense. Now, let me give you the Lou answer to that. What does disclosure mean? Well, I can't. That means talking to academics and scientists and philosophers and theologians and everyday people and citizens, because this is a topic that involves every single one of us. No one has a monopoly on this. No one owns this topic. So therefore, I think it's going to be a mutual conversation. And we all come from different backgrounds with different philosophical leanings. So this is a much more comprehensive question. What does big disclosure, capital D, look like? Well, I don't know. I'm not sure anybody does, because I think we're in the middle of the process. I think once we get there, we'll realize, we'll be able to look back, hindsight being 2020, we'll be able to say, these were the formative years where disclosure was occurring. I think it's happening now. I think we're living through those days. I think we are absolutely in the midst of disclosure, but it is a process. It's not an event. It's not aha, see, I told you so. That's not the way it works. It's a continuous learning process. It's a cycle. And the more data we get, the more we improve our own hypothesis and the better that we can ascertain what's really going on. So, that box that you put on someone's desk, so to speak, of what disclosure looks like, unfortunately, is continuing to get bigger and bigger. I am not sure there is an end there, because this is such a tremendous enigma, such a paradigm change to our species. We're finally coming to realize that, oh my goodness, this is real. This may take decades. This may take centuries. This is not an instant gratification. This is not forgive me for saying this, Burger King, have it your way and have it now. That's not the way real life works. Real life takes a long time to understand. Look how long it took us to prove that there was such a thing called a giant squid of the Pacific. How long does it take for us to understand Mother Nature? And yes, all this universe is part of Mother Nature. Well, it takes a long time. And I know people are hungry for information, and I know they want, the quick sound bites, and they want a solution. But this may be one of the cases where you're not going to get that instant solution. Maybe your great grandkids might. And I think as long as we prepare ourselves for that and manage expectations, we're probably all going to be a lot better off. I think we've come tremendously far in the last 3 years. But if you were to ask me now, Lou, is this the beginning of the end? No, I don't think so. Well, is it the end of the beginning? No, I don't think so. I think we're at the beginning of the beginning. Now, people are going to say, well, that's awful. That's sad. That's terrible, Lou. I mean, my gosh, we want our answers. I said, no, it's wonderful. How many times in life do you get an opportunity to begin to unwrap a Christmas package, little by little? This is amazing. These are exciting times. We've come so far in 3 years, and we are living through these times of being able to really nod our head for the first time from our ancient Greeks and philosophers wondering, are we alone in the universe, and speculating that, to Native Americans and our indigenous people looking into the skies and seeing things and writing those things down on petroglyphs. We are here. We're at the precipice. We are now, as a society, maybe even as a world, finally having this conversation and able to digest what is really going on. I think that's incredible. And if I die with only that knowledge, then I die a much wiser person, at least from my perspective.
Before I get to Francesco, I just want to mention that at some point before we finish off, we'd like to get your perspective on what's happening in the U.S. Senate right now as far as Marco Rubio is concerned. But right now, I'd like to throw it to Francesco. Francesco, I know you've got another angle to approach with Lou.
Yeah, just a quick question, and it could be placed in the beginning of, should have been placed in the beginning of the conversation. I think it was you in one of your presentations, eventually in Europe, Italy, or in the US, you used the acronym AAV, Advanced Aerospace Vehicle, not a phenomena, but a vehicle, which means someone is controlling it. Maybe not ET, but someone is. Did you, during AATIP, had some sort of profile of different objects with different, eventually different characteristics, different dynamics, etc.? That's my question. And another follow-up, which is quite different. Would TTSA eventually think on having an international approach to the phenomena, using researchers from different countries, for example?
So let me start with your first question about, are there commonalities and characteristics? Did we find differences in characteristics of these vehicles, or if you want to call them vehicles, whatever these phenomena are? AAVs, Advanced Aerial Vehicles. Yes, the bottom line is we came really far in understanding. There were some interesting commonalities, whether we're talking about discs or cigar shapes or triangle shapes. We had some scientists and mathematicians looking at this, and I think we are a lot closer now to understanding the potential physics behind these things than we ever have been before. I cannot go into detail of what that is and what that looks like, but I think we are a lot closer to that prize than most people think. It turns out that a lot of the observations we've seen from instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities, low observability, transmedium travel, and of course, a positive lift or anti-gravity, if you will. For many years, we looked at these, we tried to figure out each one of these observations from the perspective of some sort of exotic technology. And one of the findings was from AATIP was that it may very well be that all of those observables are actually a result of the manifestation of a single technology. And if you know how to do X, all these other things can now occur. And so that was a crossing of the river moment for us. It was very exciting for us, and it turned out that the math worked. And same with some of the scientific models. So that was tremendous for us. Now, back to your second question about TTSA having an international body. Again, I can't speak on behalf of TTSA, but we're already moving in that direction. Chris Mellon and myself and several others, TTSA is fundamentally right now a company that has several different missions. Chris Mellon and myself have really one single focus mission, and that is to get this on the agenda of anybody and everybody out there, especially their governments, so we can have this conversation and start sharing information like we should have been doing for a long time ago, as we should have a long time ago between nations. There's a reason why we shouldn't. Yes, I think when you look now at Japan coming out and openly and willingly to have this conversation, we are beginning to realize that our push on the international side is working. Talking to folks like Giorgio, who has helped us very much in Latin America to get to the right people. The conversation is occurring, and it's occurring not because of me and Chris. We facilitate it, but we're not. It's occurring because of you. It's occurring because of people like Giorgio that are willing to go out and put their reputation on the line and have this conversation take place. And I think you're going to begin to see, without letting the cat out of the bag, in the next year, some very significant efforts moving forward on an international side. Now that the conversation has occurred here in the United States and here domestically, I think it's only logical that the next step is to take this conversation internationally. And there's a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes that most people aren't even aware of. But what happened with Japan isn't a coincidence. That's not just Japan one day wake up saying, hey, we want to share UFO information with the United States. There's a lot of work that's being done behind the scenes to make this type of things happen. And it's not only Japan. So, I got to be careful what I say, because I'm no longer employed as a US government official in this capacity. So I have to be careful what I say. Can't speak on behalf of the United States government, but I think one can only see for themselves, look at the indicators and make the conclusion that there's something happening here that has never happened before.
That's great. I think the international movement's tremendous. Let's move it back a bit again to the question of Marco Rubio, with respect to the Intelligence Authorization Act of 2021 and his efforts to insert this. Really, I just did a press release on this last night, to insert this section on the advanced threat. And first of all, your opinion as to why he inserted that into a pretty mundane act that comes out every single year. What was his agenda in putting that in, and where do you think this is going to go, and what kind of conversation do you think it'll open up in the future, if any?
So I can't speak on behalf of Marco Rubio. I tell you, I had the privilege of going to school with him back at the University of Miami many years ago when we were young guys. And you know, we weren't friends. You know, didn't even know who each other was. Probably now that we know who each other is, you recognize, oh yeah, you're that guy on campus and you're that other guy. But the bottom line is, I can't speak on behalf of Marco Rubio what his intent was. But what I can say is I would suspect that, you know, hint, hint, he was probably provided a substantial briefing on this topic, and he's doing his patriotic duty. He is doing what he's supposed to do as a senator, and that is take an important topic and raise it so it can be addressed. That's exactly what he should be doing. So you know, in response, I tip my hat to him. He's extremely savvy. He's incredible, and he's a very shrewd senator. So you know, he's not a spring chicken. He knows what he's doing, and he knows the political landscape, and he knows how to get things done. And I think he's using those tools the best way he can. And I got to tell you, apolitically speaking, I applaud him tremendously for that. That took a tremendous amount of chutzpah, if you will, guts to do. You know, like Senator Reid before him, right? These are opposite sides of the political spectrum, and yet they're coming together on a common cause that affects us all equally. And I think that's, again, that's more cause to celebrate, right? I think a lot of times we get lost in elections and it becomes like a Super Bowl, right? My team versus your team. And well, no, this is all our team. This is all of ours, you know. We're all in this together. We're all stuck on this little tiny rock hurtling through space, through an obscure part of the galaxy, you know, around an average star. There's only, as I've told people before, there's only one rule to life, and no one gets out alive. So we should all work together on this topic, especially if it affects us all.
Chris, I'm going to throw it to you.
It's, you know, great. Sure. Yeah. It's a great point to bring up. And it does make me think about, you know, some of the statements that you have made previously, though, in regard to both AATIP and then onwards to the stars regarding the information that you have and the data that we have. You know, talking about the AAV, for instance, sounds an awful lot like a TR3B that has been talked about for quite some time. Is it something that we have and then is up there and does take advantage of, and we'll just use that term for now, anti-gravitics, but there's probably something that is a phenomenon that produces multiple results. That's just one statement, but going back to at the very beginning, when the release first came out through the New York Times, and there was a video release, and then there was another couple of videos released. There were statements made at the time that there was a considerable amount of evidence that was sitting there, a considerable amount of data and information that was going to be brought forth. And I now have calluses on my fingers from drumming my fingers on the table, waiting for the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th drops to come on that. And I was wondering if you could fill us in a little bit on what the nature of that information and data is that's sitting there in this great big box, and what the size of that box is, and what the contents of the box are, and when we might see the inside of that box.
Sure. Put it succinctly, you're already seeing inside the box and don't even realize it. When more is to come, I think it's important to realize that, you know, my job at AATIP and my job now is not to satisfy the idle curiosity of people. I don't mean that with disrespect. Please don't take it that way. It's just, I know people, they see a video, they see a picture, they go, aha, there it is. Yes, there's a lot more videos and pictures, but that's not up to me to release. That's going to be up to the US government, and they may never decide to do it. When we say more is coming forward, it is what you are seeing with Congress, what you are seeing incrementally internationally, what you are seeing with the media. That's not by chance. There is a tremendous amount of effort happening behind the scenes for us to take this conversation seriously. And my question to you is, would you rather see another video and be stuck on the Google chat rooms and you know, social media talking about a video, or would you rather have your congressman put in a bill language that establishes a UAP task force, a real program to do this? That's That's the prize, not another video or another picture. Are there other videos? Yes, there are. Are there other pictures? Yes. And I wouldn't be surprised if some of that comes to light at some point, but that's helpful at the micro level. It makes people feel, ooh, interesting, right? It's like a fireworks show. But that's not what is going to move this effort forward. I believe we have to be very deliberate how we have this conversation. Now, I'm going to tell you in retrospect, I know there's critics out there that say, well, Lou, you don't control the narrative. You shouldn't be controlling the narrative. Who are you to decide how we have disclosure? And that's a great question, because I'm not. I should not be the one to make that determination, and I don't make that determination. But all I can do is use those tools that I have in my tool bag to accomplish the mission that I've been given. And not everything is, you don't fix everything with a screwdriver, just like you don't fix everything with a hammer. There's a time to use those tools. There's a time for a video to come out. And again, I kind of left some breadcrumbs. If people know how I work, they'll realize every time I have one of these conversations, I always leave breadcrumbs, always. And if you look at the beginning of this conversation, I said, I think more information is going to be forthcoming. I'm not saying that frivolously. I'm telling you that from my understanding, there's going to be more of this information coming out of the box. Now, I'm not telling you if it's a video or a picture or a reporting or whatever. I'm not going to go there. But I think we are already unwrapping the present. I think that we are inside the box already. I would wait for some of the fog to clear, and I'll bet probably some more things will become a little bit more clear for us to see and maybe consume. But these are exciting times, and we've got to give people in the government who are now charged with handling this topic, we've got to give them the latitude. We've got to give them breadth and depth to maneuver and operate this, because this is the first time it's ever been done, and there's people who still want to kill it. There's still people who don't want this to occur. So it's right now in a kind of a precarious, delicate balance. You've got some people saying full tilt boogie, let's do this. You got other people saying, we're not going to do it. We'll just wait out this administration and wait for another one or another one or another one, right? So, it's still a bit of a running gun battle, unfortunately.
I think that what you're talking about, the fog clearing, Lou, is a good analogy, because all this information has been coming out, first of all. And there's the other factor to this, the information that has come out and the history that Francesco talked about, all of that information is weighing on the shoulders of people like yourself. And I know there's a certain level of anxiety, frustration, whatever you want to call it. And I'm going to throw it to Chrissy to frame that question for you, because I think it's something that I saw in some of the unidentified programs that you've done. So Chrissy, I'll just throw that to you, and you frame the question, because I know you have a really good perspective on that.
Well, where I
And
was
folks,
gonna...
just so you know, I got about 10 minutes. I'm sorry. And then of course, I can come back later on.
That's fine. Yeah, go right ahead.
Yep.
Yeah, where I wanted to go with some of the questions too, was looking at working with, Tom DeLonge, Into the Stars. Why did you decide to go with that community rather than any other community that, talks about UAPs? And then also, I'm assuming you have a strategy that's working with major icons, experts, pop culture experts that live, like we say, like Billy Ray Cyrus has come out recently and said that he's seen UFOs. We know that when you work with some type of icons and experts, that they will help push agenda. Have you guys planned, can I ask that? Have you planned Into the Stars with Tom DeLonge to use that vehicle? And if so, who are those people that are you looking to work with alongside of that strategy to disseminate your information?
Well, I'll let Tom answer the question as it relates to people in Hollywood. I'm not a Hollywood guy. I'm not an actor. I'm not a performer. With me, what you see is what you get. That's why, obviously when we're doing unidentified, they wouldn't even put a makeup artist on me, because this is it. It doesn't get any better. No hope for me. But when it comes to the entertainment side and engaging people in Hollywood, that's really Tom's forte, not mine. That's a TTSA thing. That's not really my focus, or Chris Mellon. I want to answer your question succinctly. You asked me what was my deciding factor to jump on this boat? And it's really three people. It's Chris Mellon, Hal Puthoff, and Steve Justice. These individuals are people who I've known. If I didn't know them personally, I knew of them for a very long time. They had incredible reputations. And these were very serious people who were charged with defending America. And so I trust them with my life, period, full stop. And so anytime someone pulls up on a boat and says, hey, jump on board, we're going to go take the beachhead. When you have those three individuals, to me, that's like the dream team. These are men that I respect with every fiber of my existence. So that's why I made that decision. Now, as far as engaging people in Hollywood, again, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not a Hollywood guy. I live in the middle of Wyoming, nowhere Wyoming, because I don't fall into that crowd. I'm not a glitz and glam kind of guy. I build, old Jeeps and motorcycles as a hobby. That's me. I think again, not to be oblique, but I think I'll let Tom probably answer that question. That's not my forte. My job is engaging government people. My job is engaging military, intelligence people, people like you in the media that want to know. I can do that because I'm used to communicating complex information to senior DoD leadership and the intelligence community in a consumable manner. So that's where my skill set comes into play. I don't really engage Hollywood. Those folks, actors and performers. I don't know what to say. I wouldn't know even how to approach people like that. First of all, I don't run into the circles. I'm not, like I said, I'm not a Hollywood guy. People see, oh, you got that guy on TV, but I'm not a TV guy. Chris Mellon and I did that show, and we made the decision to do it. It was only a short-term project. It was to get the conversation going. Neither one of us wanted to be on TV. None of us liked being on TV, but we knew that if we wanted to get the conversation going, we would have to do this in a manner that everybody could see the evidence for themselves, provided it was not at the classified level. And so that's why we decided to team up with History Channel, because we wanted to present this information to help the conversation to begin. But that was our intent. So again, I don't think I really, Chrissy, answered your question very well, but
No, you did.
That's okay. That's okay. Yeah. No, Lou, we've pretty much kind of run the string out here. Want to put a button on this. I want to thank you so much for your honesty, for your authenticity, and your deep emotional response to this issue, not just with respect to the information, but we've seen the man very clearly right now. And I'm hoping right now that we allow our viewers to see who you are and what you represent and how you're attempting to bring this thing forward, literally, as you said, with every fiber of your body. And we don't get that kind of authenticity from people very often with respect to this issue. So I want to thank the panel for doing all of this and being with us. And Lou, just before we leave, before I throw it to Chris, could you just outline for us very quickly where people might want to go or could go to find out more information about what you do and what the Academy is all about, or whatever else you can provide for us?
So TTSA has its own website. You just type it in Google and jump on the webpage. I'm probably going to be potentially launching something here soon that allows people to interact and engage maybe a little bit more specifically about the phenomena itself. Unfortunately, I don't have anywhere to direct your folks to right now. I do have a Twitter page. This is, by the way, a big step for me because I'm not savvy with social media. I'm kind of like a monkey at the keyboard. So I try my best. But people are surprised because I do engage people on that platform. People ask questions, saying, "Oh, Lou will never respond," and yeah, actually, I do. I'm pretty approachable. Of course, in other ways, look, if people are really interested, they can contact you, and if you see fit, you can have them contact me. I'm out here in Wyoming. If anybody ever wants to come out here to the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains and have a cup of coffee with me and sit on the front porch, I'd love to have them. Not a problem.
I hope your front porch is big enough for all of us.
I'll make sure it is. Absolutely.
For sure.
You guys are always welcome to come out here anytime you want, and I mean it sincerely. It's an open and honest invitation. It's sincere.
Chris, I'll throw it to you.
Great. You might see us come May or June. In the meantime, you're welcome to come down here to Miami Beach and spend some of those cold winter months from Wyoming down this way.
Yeah, I can see
wanna
the
thank you.
foliage back there in your beautiful house. So
Yeah, I just had to, throw that in there.
yeah.
Thank you again for being here. It's been wonderful. It's been a fantastic conversation. It's been very stimulating for us, and I hope it is as well for our listeners out there. And if you enjoyed the conversation we had today and would like to hear more of these in the future, please feel free to hit the subscribe button at the bottom of this video. And if you enjoyed our conversation with Lou and would like to see further conversations along this line, hit the like button. And if you didn't like it, something wrong with you. I don't know, because this has been one of the most fascinating conversations that we've ever had and ever been a part of. So we look forward to having you back, sir. We want to thank you again for taking time from your busy day and schedule to spend some time with us, sharing your insights, sharing your viewpoints, sharing your experiences, because that's what we are all about here. So once again, farewell, everybody. Until next time, take care.
You've been listening to the New Frontier Network.